Hello, good afternoon, everyone. Good afternoon and welcome. My name is Andrew Harvey, and I am the CEO of VMA Group. And I'm delighted to be here this afternoon hosting what is the next episode in our Meet the Author series. And a massive big welcome and thanks to Jenna Tiffany, who is joining us this afternoon to talk all about marketing strategy. Jenna's actually written a couple of books over the last few years, but today we're going to be focusing on a particular book, her latest book, which is all about marketing strategy and how to implement and measure a successful marketing strategy. So, massive thank you, Jenna, for joining us this afternoon. I'm going to ask Jenna to introduce herself in a moment, as I'm sure she will do a far better job of it than I possibly could. But before I do that, I'm just going to talk slowly for the next sort of 60, 90 seconds, just to give everyone a chance to join the call and get settled. As is often the case now with this Meet the Author series, we have a lot of people signed up, as it were, to join us this afternoon. So, a bit of a preamble from me for the next 90 seconds or so. And on that point, actually, some of you will have been to our Meet the Author conversations in the past. Some of you will know VMA Group already. For those that don't, VMA Group is an international executive search firm and recruitment firm, and we specialize very much and specifically within the world of marketing and communications and sort of assorted talent solutions. And actually, we work with all sorts of organizations all around the world, supporting them with whatever kind of marketing comms talent needs that they have. And actually, we've been doing it for a long old time. So we actually turned 49 later this year. So we've been around for a long while. Why do we run this Meet the Author series? Well, having worked in marketing or comms recruitment for over 20 years, I personally am a massive believer in the value of continued professional development. And I think there's a strong link between CPD and those people that perform best in their careers because as we know, the world around us continues to change. Technology continues to change. Politics continue to change. Society continues to change. And I think if we don't keep up with that change in many ways, then we will struggle as the world changes around us. And I think one of the best ways to keep up with the changing world is through continued learning, which can take place can take shape in many forms. But that's really why we run these webinars, to support anyone who's working in comms or marketing with their own ongoing professional development. I think there's no better way to do that than to speak to those people or learn from those people in the industry that are researching and writing about this stuff. And I say that's really what is behind this conversation today. Both myself and Jenna, we hope that you perhaps learn some stuff from the conversation today. Maybe there'll be one or two bits that you can take away and employ in your own roles, in your own careers, or in your own organizations, and your own marketing strategy, of course, as well. We will be recording this webinar. So if you have to duck out halfway through, you'll be able to find it on our website, our YouTube channel. You may want to share it with colleagues or friends as well, so feel free to do that too. We are happy. Jenna is happy. I'm happy also to take some questions at the end of this webinar. So you'll have been to one of these before. I'm sure you know how the Q&A works. So Q&A box at the bottom of the screen. Please do put any questions that you have in there, and we'll do our best to answer those. Jenna's book is full, as you would imagine, of brilliant content, but I want to say we're only probably going to have a chance to scratch the surface today. But the good news is you can buy it. You can buy it online. You can buy it actually from Kogan Publishers, the publisher that has worked with Jenna, and you can buy it actually from other online places too. But the great news is that we have a discount code from Jenna today, which we're going to put into the chat. So if you want to buy a copy, I'd recommend that you do go out, use that discount code and take a look. I'm sure you'll find it helpful. So that is probably enough for me. I think we've probably got enough people on and settled. So Jenna, thanks again for joining us this afternoon. Over to you. Perhaps you could start by telling us a little bit about yourself and why you decided to write this book.
Yeah, sure. No, thanks a lot for having me, Andrew. I'm really looking forward to this conversation. So about me, I'm Jenna Tiffany. I'm a chartered marketeer. I've been working in marketing for close to 20 years. I am a qualified teacher and I heavily now teach marketing, but I also run a marketing agency, and we're based in both London and in Lisbon, where I currently am. And we work across the full marketing mix with a lot of different brands and clients. So what prompted me to write marketing strategy? Well, I first I wrote my first edition of the book in 2021, which feels like a very long time ago now. Um, and it was actually what prompted me to write the book was that at the time when I was working throughout my career, I've worked in technology companies and for brands and for retailers and for travel companies. And then I started consulting and I started my consultancy business. And I was coming up with the same question from clients who, and the same conversation where there was a big misunderstanding of the difference between strategy and tactics. And I felt like I was repeating myself constantly with explaining the difference between
Right.
the two and like why we need to have a strategy and have you thought about your objectives and why you're using these tactics and about the persona and the customer. And I got to a point where I think I'd explained this 3 or 4 times in the same week. And I was like, I need to do something about this. Like, there's no good me just getting frustrated. Like, I need to help support marketers. And I started to hunt around and see, is there a framework that actually we could be using? And when I went to university and I studied marketing, the SOSTAC framework was one of the key ones by PR Smith, a really great framework, but I felt like it was a little bit overcomplicated when trying to explain that to clients and brands. And so that frustration really started me on the journey of, I
Right.
think there's something here where I didn't want to write a book that was academic. I went to university and you get those books and you have to read them, but they're really heavy and they're very academically written and they're maybe got less practical elements. And so I thought it was important to create a framework that marketers and businesses could use, but also use it in a practical way. So to bring it to life as much as possible with case studies and examples. And that's kind of where it started, and I've been lucky enough to now write the second edition.
Brilliant. Well, thank you for that. It's good to get that background. And it's an interesting take, as you say, on trying to simplify the process as well, because marketing strategy is something you say that we will have all talked about in the past. People do talk about it, they talk about it in different ways. There's lots of other material out there, but it's good to know that you've perhaps looked at it from a slightly different perspective. So, as I said, there is a lot in the book, and we're not going to have a chance to cover it all this afternoon, but I have pulled out some questions that I thought would be interesting to put to you. And actually, the first one is about just the general concept of marketing strategy, right? So it's been around a long time. I studied with the Chartered Institute of Marketing 25 years ago. We've all talked about it for many years, as many people will have done. But I suppose the question I've got for you is what's the difference between good marketing strategy today and what marketing strategy would have looked like 20 years ago when I was reading those books with the CIM? What's changed and what does good look like today?
Yeah, so the importance of marketing strategy hasn't changed. I think that's a key distinction to make. Even with AI now, marketing strategy is so important to have and to get right. I think some of the other changes there is having more of a structure. So that was something that in the my first book took me 3 years to develop the strategy
Wow.
framework. And I actually only defined it right at the very end, and I had to restructure my entire book because it
Wow.
follows the full framework. A note to any like aspiring authors, do not
Yeah.
do that right at the end. It's very stressful. Um, but the reason why I pondered over that for so long was because I wanted to make sure that I wasn't missing something, but also that it was going to be practical, that
Right.
this is going to stand the test of time. And what I mean by that is that, if you have a framework and you're thinking about what needs to go in the strategy, then you can use a template to do that. You can do that, use that template to refine what you already have and maybe see, well, actually, I've got some gaps in this. I don't really know who I'm trying to reach, or I don't really know how I'm going to generate some metrics or what I'm really focusing on. And pulling that out of the framework was a really important part. The bit that I've seen a big movement towards, and actually AI has really helped with this. AI can hinder in some respects, but has really helped
Yeah.
elevate this further, is to really think about the objectives and to really define what it is you're trying to achieve, like the why behind everything.
Yeah.
So for us to be able to use AI tools effectively and to have a very contextual prompt, we need to be answering the why question more than we probably did before and
Right.
more intentionally. And I think this is where AI has really helped us do that, because if we don't put in that wider context, if we don't ask those questions, if we don't give that detail, then we get generic responses back from the AI tool. So I've seen that progression happen in the last 5 years anyway, of much more robust objectives that can scale, that
Right.
have depth in them and very specific. Um, Rather than, me asking a question of the head of marketing of what's your objective and getting a blank face, I have less of that kind of response now. Um, in the last year, AI has really elevated that further. So I think that for me is like the biggest change
Okay.
I've seen in strategic thinking.
Yeah. And I suppose that's the case of what many people say, that AI is not necessarily taking your job, it's supporting you to do your job better. And that's where it positively contributes. Um, Yeah. Okay. And so, what are organisations? You think about ask about the why, and obviously we talk about good marketing strategies should be linked to business objectives. It's a classic kind of statement. Where are organisations going wrong though when trying to link their marketing to their business outcomes at the moment? What do you see people doing wrong?
Yeah, I think there's a couple of things here. Every marketing strategy should always be aligning back to the business objectives. And if they don't, it becomes very difficult for us in marketing to demonstrate the value. And
Yeah.
that goes full circle of getting more budget, getting more resources, demonstrating what return we've delivered in marketing. If we don't tie it back to the business objectives, then it might be great marketing, it's achieved brilliant results, but has it really delivered what the business wanted? So we always need to be doing that. The issues that I've seen so many organizations fall into this trap, even if they're small organizations, large enterprise organizations, is when either the objectives aren't clear, so the objectives are really deliberately vague, or they don't have any metrics in them, or there's fluffy timescales of we want to achieve this when, well, sometime in the future, and it's not very
Mm.
concrete. And also when those objectives or the vision and the mission aren't clearly communicated. If it's overly complicated, if it's not using plain language, if the rest of the organization don't understand it, then it's very difficult to then develop and create a strategy on that if you don't really understand where the business is going. Or on the flip side, if the business is changing its direction all of the time, and that can be quite a big challenge, especially in startups where it's very ad hoc, things are moving very fast, and so the direction might be pivoting quite a lot. And it's very difficult then to have any form of strategy. You fall into the tactical ad hoc
Right.
planning stages. So the communication piece is really important, and everybody understanding exactly what it is the organization is trying to do, and having very clearly outlined objectives that are concrete, that are measurable, that you can really clearly apply to and see, okay, this is how marketing can help contribute towards some of that, of what the business is trying to do.
Mm. Just, I suppose I've got a question for you. What do you, and I don't know whether you've necessarily got an answer to this, but in terms of the people that you meet, you lecture, you meet a lot of people, speak to a lot of people. If you looked at 100 organizations now, looked at 100 marketing directors working in in an organization, could be an SME or a large organization, what percentage roughly have their marketing strategy truly aligned with their business strategies? It's like 50% of people have got this right, or what's the kind of percentage do you think that's still struggling with this?
Yeah, I mean, it's a great question. I would hope it's at least 50%. I think from what I've seen since my first book, be it going live in 2021 to now, and obviously it was a big change then. We had COVID, we've got rapid globalization that's taken place, technology. If you don't have clear organizational objectives, it's very difficult to survive
Yeah,
in today's world and today's business world. So most organizations have clear objectives. I would probably say around about 65-70% now typically have it. Where it can fall over, though, is the communication part as well. So they might have really clear
right.
objectives, but actually the
Yeah,
director just can't communicate, or the CEO doesn't communicate very
yeah,
effectively. And that's where it can, you need to bring people along on that mission if you're going to achieve it together. Otherwise, everybody's kind
yeah,
of doing their own things. You've got different departments working on different strategies and objectives and plans, and then nothing's really coming together towards that overall business goal. So it hopefully is more than 50%.
yeah.
Um, and
Okay.
yeah, I would. I think it is that. I've definitely
Okay.
seen much more increase in that.
Yeah. But I guess equally, if someone's listening in today and they're still grappling a little bit with their marketing strategy and their business goals, they're not entirely alone. It's still a common challenge for a lot of people as well.
Yeah,
Um,
it still isn't. And especially when it comes to either end of year planning or quarterly planning or monthly planning, you might find that you're revisiting these quite often at the moment because we've got lots of fluctuations happening in the macro environment. Um, and so you might find, well, actually, that objective isn't fit for purpose right now because things have changed too drastically. A lot
yeah.
of businesses are also finding themselves in that position as well.
Right. And just a final question on this, just to build on what we said. If you were going to give one or two tips to ensure that marketing leaders could truly align their strategy with what the business is doing, what would the one or two things you would say that these marketing leaders should definitely do to make sure they're going to be aligned, their strategy is going to be aligned with the business?
Yeah, so one of the key starting points is really, and this is for your strategy as well, is to really research and understand the marketing environment. And that's looking at the macro environment, so what's happening externally through great models like the pestle, for example, looking at the politics, the economic changes, societal technology, and so on, and exploring those. Because what you also want to ensure is that marketing can help to achieve these objectives. And you want to understand where there might be some challenges in doing so. Because if we're not fully aware of that from our marketing perspective, then our strategy might not quite hit what we were expecting because maybe there's something's going to change in the next 6 months. We didn't maybe research that, we didn't quite understand that, and we haven't factored that in. Or we might need to be very sensitive about particular messages based on societal perceptions and things like that to help achieve those objectives. So that's really important. The other element is to look at the SWOT-L. So I have the SWOT-L in my book. For those of you that have seen the SWOT, it's the same. So you're looking at strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. But also the ELL is marketing specific. So it's looking at what's your existing marketing, what's your limitations, and what can you leverage? Like, what are you already doing that's really effective that you can do more of? Now, this means that you become already very strategic in terms of what you can achieve, and then you can align that to the business objectives. If we just say, yeah, okay, we can do that, we can achieve those objectives without really doing that research, we might find that we oversell ourselves a little bit, or we might find that actually, yeah, we can contribute, but maybe only this proportion, or we can contribute, but we have to bear this and this in mind. And we've got some of these existing challenges that are very organizational specific that we need to take into consideration. Now that starts to change the conversation a little bit of looking at more your resourcing, your skill set, the
Mhm.
capabilities, your budget. And then already you're starting to build that bigger picture of, okay, I see where the business is trying to go, and this is what we might need to do to get there. And then already it's a much more strategic conversation, especially if you find that actually you're going to have a number of key challenges to achieve that business objective. You can raise that much sooner with the CEO, with the finance director, and open up that conversation rather than looking at that in 6 months' time and saying, well, we're not going to quite hit that now because of X, Y, and Z.
Yeah. Okay. Brilliant. Well, there's already a load of things there for people to start thinking about. One of the things you mentioned, we've talked about AI already, but before we move on to the next set of questions, I just wanted to pick up on this again because um, I think it's a generalization to say that a lot of people in marketing are using AI at the moment for tactical stuff. But in relation to your book and what we're talking about here, say marketing strategy, what's your view on how leaders can, should be using AI for the development of marketing strategy and balancing that with their own knowledge and creativity and thinking?
Yeah, so the way I look at marketing and the way I AI and the way I teach students all over the world about how to use AI and the same for marketers that are already in the field is to look at AI as your assistant. So to have it assist you with the research, to have it assist you with the analysis of data that you might already have, obviously anonymize it, but you can use that to analyze that for you because that's where AI is incredibly powerful. It can give those results back in milliseconds that would take us a long time to digest, to summarize, and to draw out the key points. But the key element here is we need to do it with critical thinking in mind. And this is where the challenge comes in, because we need to, first of all, understand what we want it to do and why. So it goes back to that question of why.
Mm.
And we need to understand, once we get the result, what are we expecting to see here? Like, is it really factually correct on what it's given us, or has it just hallucinated? And also, are we asking it the right questions? Like, what's our next prompt point here? What else do we need to understand? And we need to have that strategic mindset and critical thinking to be able to do that. The challenge that we have today, and we saw this with the launch of Google when it first came out, is that we have an abundance of information. And I see this across the full spectrum of students that I teach, that are undergraduates, that are masters, that are career switchers, that are experienced marketeers.
Mm.
We now have an abundance of accessible information. We don't necessarily know the questions to ask. So
Mm.
for leaders, thinking about how do we bring in AI into our teams and how do we use it, I do see a lot of marketers using it very tactically, less strategically. I don't see huge numbers of marketers using it strategically yet. And I think that's just because we need to take a step back a little bit and just think about, okay, what is it we're hoping to get from this tool, first of all? And what are our key questions here? Like, what are we curious about from this data? Like, what are we hoping to discover and understand? And then we can deep dive further into that with a more strategic mindset, rather than I've got this data, pull out the key segments, and boom, I'm going to use that, segment my email and send it. Rather than, are there many missed opportunities here? And what audiences should we be engaging with? And are we missing something? Should we be doing
Mm.
X, Y, and Z? And having that more assistant level strategic conversation.
Yeah. Well, I think it's going to develop over the coming years at pace in terms of how people use it. And I say not just for tactical implementation, but for strategy as well. But I think you make some great points there. So thank you for sharing that. And I think we might have a few questions coming in on that as well. So let's imagine now for a moment that people are developing their strategy, they're implementing that. I've got to ask about return on investment. And I speak to lots of marketing directors as well, as clearly given the job that I do. Um, and sometimes we have people that are measuring all sorts of stuff, and you wonder what the value of that actually is. And then you think, well, sometimes they're not measuring stuff that really matters. So, do you think? What's your view on people measuring stuff that's easy to measure because they've always measured it that way versus actually stuff that people should be really measuring these days? That the CEO and the board would be interested in, particularly when it comes to marketing strategy.
Yeah, so I've seen a lot of marketers and brands measuring the easy metrics. So things like the opens and the clicks, for example, or the visits. And okay, that is what a lot of us call, and I call, like, your vanity metrics, because
Yeah.
they're like the surface level. Like, what are they really telling us? And this is where we need to dig deeper into that. Now, strategic marketeers should be looking at things like efficiency. So looking at, have we achieved those desired results? Like, have we really achieved our objective or not? We should be looking at the value. So much to your point, I mean, ROI might have been what we were aiming for, but what about customer lifetime value? Or what
Yeah.
about, maybe we're driving more awareness? Maybe we've got more leads, maybe we've got more traffic, and that's meaningful for different reasons, for different organizations. Maybe we actually just got some more eyeballs on what we're doing. It can
Mm.
be something as simple as that. It doesn't always have to be a monetary return. And that's an important distinction, because not all campaigns, not all strategies are there to drive more revenue. You'd hope they will at some point, but the primary goal might actually just to be to drive more awareness about what you do, or
Yeah.
more retention of your existing customer base. And the other part is the spending. So how much does it really cost us to get those more eyeballs, to get that more awareness? And of course, that's important. It really, where we need to be tailoring this is depending on who we're talking to. You mentioned there the CEO and the finance director. They're going to want see some very similar metrics, but they're also going to want to see some different things. And so
Yeah.
we do also need to tailor that conversation to the different stakeholders. And when we do that, we start to show the full spectrum and possibilities of marketing rather than just talking about opens and clicks or revenue. We can also talk about, well, actually, this awareness drove this many people from this segment, and look how engaged they are on this article. We should do more of that.
Right.
It starts to create that more detailed conversation.
Yeah. So, in your view, then, we've talked about developing strategy, we've talked about measuring strategy. If you were looking at strategies, what's the difference? Again, just sort of building on that, what's the difference between a strategy that looks good on paper and one that is actually, in your point of view, going to deliver real commercial impact? What would the difference
Yeah.
be?
Well, it goes back to what we were talking about right at the beginning about aligning to those objectives. So I've seen some what look great strategies on paper, like really good. Okay, yeah, that makes logical sense. Yes, okay, I can see
Yeah.
what we're going for here. And then it doesn't work or it doesn't deliver the results that the business wanted, or it went in a completely different direction to what the business needed. And that's where we really need to align to those organizational goals and objectives. That's really important because if the strategy doesn't deliver that, then what is it really delivering? It
Yeah.
might be delivering a great marketing campaign. It looks good, but the value to the organization is going to be really low. And that becomes a very difficult conversation for the marketing team, for the department, for the marketing person when it comes to the next round of funding. So that's really important. The other part of what a good strategy looks like is one that is researched. It's one that really knows what's happening in the marketing environment. The first starting point for me, and this has always been the case ever since I started doing strategy, is to always understand what's going on in the marketplace. Because if we don't really understand that, it's very difficult for us to make any strategic recommendations, or we can make them, but they're very misaligned to what's happening in the outside world. And so it doesn't quite hit the mark. So like one of an example of that was Nike, who recently did a advertisement at the Boston Marathon, and
Right.
they I'm paraphrasing the slogan, but it was around the words of, these shoes are not made for walking. And it
Right.
completely missed the mark because people that are doing a marathon might walk run it, they might
Right.
walk it. And they don't always need to run it. And immediately they got so much backlash from that. Now, if I don't know if that was AI generated, that's a big question, maybe,
Right.
possibly, and it might have missed the context. But the other part of that is that the marketeers just either, they missed the societal backlash on
Right.
that. They missed how the audience was going to perceive that. Yes, they want to target runners, they want to have that as their main demographic, understand that. But at a marathon, especially the Boston Marathon, huge numbers of people don't all run that same
Right.
marathon. So already you've alienated quite a big part of your audience base and created quite a negative connotation for a brand that always says, just do it, just
Yeah.
go for it. And it goes against that. So that's where we need to be really careful, especially now in 2026, where we're seeing a lot of political change, a lot of economic change, technology is having a big impact on society and so on. We need to be very socially aware of how our messages are being perceived. And we can only do that if we really understand that marketing environment.
Mm. Do you think it's you're making, think about lots of things as you're talking? Do you think it's harder than ever to measure the success of strategies with all of these different channels, with AI and the way it's impacting things, and say Nike brands that have been around for a long time, and say something happens now, and in the media it's picked up, and there's lots of things going on in a way in which they weren't 10, 15, 20 years ago when I started talking about marketing strategy as a young guy. Is it more difficult to measure? Because part of your book is around measuring, right? So is it more difficult to measure than ever before, or equally is it easier with all this tech that's around?
Yeah, is it easier? Is it more difficult? I wouldn't say it's either of those. I would,
Right.
I don't think marketing's ever been something that's been easy to measure. The challenge that we've always faced as marketeers is that we have so many ways that we can measure and so many metrics that we can use. In my first book, I have a whole chapter just dedicated to metrics. It's one of the biggest chapters in my book, and it covers all metrics for every tactic. In my
Mm.
second edition, I talked about the tools that you would use and where you need to focus your attention in terms of measurement dependent on which tactics you use. AI does create some difficulty in measuring, where do my results appear in AI search and so on, and that's a big debate in the industry. And we're getting to a point in marketing where we can't necessarily see all what's happening. We don't have that full visibility of the customer journey and all those steps anymore. There are some gaps in there, and people are turning on more like ad blockers, for example, or wanting to do more
Right.
anonymous activity. But our key metrics that we're focusing on towards that are aligned to our objectives, we can still measure those. We might find they're not 100% accurate, but we have a good gauge on those ones. It's the vanity metrics that actually we can struggle with
Right.
now. So things like opens, like on an email, for example, is not 100% accurate, never has been. It's now blocked by most iOS devices. It's overinflated. Really, should we have been hinging all of our strategies on that metric? No, probably not. And it's very questionable. And all of us in the industry that have been working in email for a long time have said that for years. Now the technology is also caught up with that. And so I think this is where we need to have that strategic, critical thinking of what is the most important things for us to measure. And then what are the nice to have metrics that, okay, they give us some indications and they can tell us whether it's moving in the right direction. But we're not going to hang our strategic hat on those ones. We're not going to say, right, this is definitely working because of these metrics. So I think that's important. One thing that has been elevated, though, with the AI tools is that we can now generate charts, reports, summaries, commentary at incredible speeds. So for quite a long time, we had huge amounts of data that we just couldn't analyze. And we were working with so many different brands and clients that said, look, we're tracking all this data, but we can't make heads or tails out of this. We don't have the resource. It's taking too long. We've got fragmented tools and systems. We can't really get an answer to what is our customer lifetime value, for example. Now, with the AI tools, this has elevated us. This has allowed us to do that. So we can now digest that analysis and we can really create some robust insights. So from that perspective, that has become easier and it's more accessible. The challenge is asking the right questions and being able to look at that strategically.
Where do you think most people get it wrong when it comes to measurement then? Is it when they set the strategy, they're not clear enough in the strategy about how they're going to measure what they're going to measure? So it's at the front part of that process, or is it, when it actually comes to the measurement, the reporting on that, the frequency, is there a part in the process where people tend to get it wrong?
Yeah, it's typically right at the beginning. It's in the
Right.
objectives. So sometimes it can come from the organizational objectives not being concrete enough, and then the
Yeah.
marketing objectives kind of we have to try and create something and it becomes quite vague. And that can come from, right from the top at the organizational level. If we have clear organizational objectives with a metric in there and we've got some targets that we need to get to, then we should be able to break that down and look at that through the marketing lens and determine, okay, the organization wants to achieve this in revenue. This is the segment we need to be targeting. This is the products. This is what we need to be considering, and making very robust objectives that include the metric we're going to be measuring. If we have objectives that are increased revenue, which I rarely see as much as I used to, but believe me, we used to get this as a brief as a consultancy,
Right.
just increase revenue for us. It's easy.
Right.
No value in terms of how much, what's the context, where are we at
Right.
now, with who, all of that was missing. And if we don't have that, how do we measure that? How do we know we've really increased revenue? We don't, okay, we can look at some ballpark figure. Yeah, we've increased it. Okay, but to who, what product? That's starting to ask more questions than it answers. So it's at the objective level, and that's where it needs to be very robust. We need to be really confident with it. And we might have 2 or 3 objectives, and each one, you might have your primary objective that supports the overall organizational goals. And then you might have a secondary and a tertiary objective that helps support that primary one. It doesn't mean that they're all as important as each other. You might have a hierarchy of them, but each one should have a clear measurable aspect to it, because that means when we come to measuring success, or where we might not be as successful as we hoped, we come to a check-in point in a month later, at a month's time, then we can see, yes, we're hitting the mark. Actually, no, we're a little bit below. We might need to adjust something. Without
Mm.
that, it's very difficult to measure anything.
Yeah. Do you think, obviously mindful that if people check out your profile, they'll see that you've been involved with lots of different learning organizations, as I would call them, and you're teaching and lecturing. Do you think, bit of a curveball question here, but do you think generally across the industry that the training and development of young marketeers is keeping up to date or keeping pace with the world that's changing around us?
Yeah, I mean, it's a great question, and it's education in itself is just very, it's a huge topic, especially with AI. I've got my son who's going to be going into starting his school journey, and I'm thinking, wow, what is he going to be prepared? Like, what's his life going to look like when he
Mm,
finishes school, and what's he need to be learning to be up to date? And in terms of from a marketing perspective. Yes, some institutions are more up to date with that than others. And I'm fortunate enough to be able to teach with LSE. I helped create the career accelerator in marketing. So for anyone looking to switch or grow into a leadership role, there's like a 6 month to 9 month program. And I helped build that and create that. And we're actually going through the process now of updating that, uplifting that course so that it includes more of the AI elements that we're now using every day in marketing, that I'm using, that a lot of marketers are using. And the I think the challenge with the training isn't necessarily about knowing how to create a correct prompt or anything like that, because that's changing on a monthly basis as the
mm,
AI tools get more intelligent. The challenge is that, and what I see with a lot of students and marketeers is that we need to become more tool agnostic. And what I mean by that is we need to have the confidence to pick up any tool, to
right.
be able to just get a login, very quickly find your way around, understand an overview of how it works in the back end, not from a technical level, but just understanding how
Mm,
it connects to other infrastructure, other technology, other software that the organization might be using, and just having an awareness of that. Because once we have that, we start to understand the full, bigger data picture. And it means that we can pick up any tool. Now, the reason why I think that's really important is because not a single one of our clients has ever used the same tech stack. Not a single one.
right.
They're all using different tech stacks.
Right.
And in marketing, we have from the marketing tech landscape, it's a great snapshot of how much tech there is in the marketing industry. It's released every year. It's a really brilliant research report. If you haven't seen it before, definitely worth checking it out. They announced just a few months ago that there's now 15,000 pieces of marketing technology, and that's across the whole industry. 15,000.
Wow.
That's huge. And that's from a few months ago. So you can imagine how many more there are
Yeah.
now.
How
But
do you keep up to date with that? That's just
exactly.
impossible.
Exactly. So rather than learning one tool, unless it's core to your job right now, like GA4, for example, Google Analytics 4, highly recommend that everybody gets to grips with that one because it will set you up
Right.
really well with any other data analytics tool. But for the other tools, you want to feel confident in just being able to log in, because the chances of you using the same tool in a year's time is pretty unlikely. You're probably going to be using quite a few other tools as well. And you
Mm,
need to have that confidence to just be able to log in. So, for example, like myself and my team, if we, with all of our clients, they all have different tools that they're using. And if we bring on a new client, we'll have different tools that we'll need to access. We will log in and find our way around that tool within about less than 15 minutes,
wow.
because we have the experience of using huge numbers of different tools, and they're all very much of a muchness to an extent in terms of how they work and
Mm,
their UI and how you use them. And that's a tool that's a skill that we really need to encourage in marketing, and I don't think we do enough of that.
mm,
And with the AI tools, they're all doing something slightly differently, but they're all working in a very similar way. So once you use one, you get kind of accustomed to it. You could then jump into another one. And having just signing up and getting a free logging and doing that will build your confidence in that well, actually, yeah, I can access any of these tools and just be able to use them.
Is that where people you think are under investing at the moment in terms of learning development? So again, in the context of marketing strategy, thinking about how you can ensure that you as a marketing leader or your team are well placed to be able to develop great strategy that's linked to the right business outcomes. Where are people under investing in terms of being able to do that? Is it in the technology? Is it in understanding the business? Where are they under investing in their skills?
Yeah, so the tool agnostic thing is a really important future building skill, really important. Um, where I think there's huge underinvestment in training, especially now, is research. So being able to conduct research. A lot of people don't actually know how to research effectively, even with using AI. AI helps this, but you need to be able to think about what exactly it is you want to understand and have a level of curiosity in what you're trying to understand. And that comes with experience, but it also comes with being able to frame questions in a certain way, to be able to frame prompts in a certain way and use those tools in a certain way. So research is a really important one. Going back to my point earlier, understanding the marketing environment is heavily research orientated, really important for marketeers. The other thing, aside from having that strategic thinking that we've been talking about, is critical thinking. Critical thinking from my experience of teaching for the last 7 or more years, and I teach internationally, face to face and online, so I get exposure to huge numbers of students. I teach more than 1,000 pupils a year. Um, Critical thinking is something that I have witnessed decline
Really?
from students. Yeah, massively.
Why
Whether
why
they're
do you think
really,
that is?
I think because it's too easy to get the answer and not question it.
Right. Okay.
And it's becoming, and when I first teach a class, I always ask the students, no matter of their experience, their background, or anything, I always ask them, but why are you proposing that? Why is that the right
Right.
answer? Why is that piece of research your evidence? And to start with, they'll kind of look at me and be like, well, I thought you were going to tell me the answer. Like, you're the teacher. Why are you asking me why? Um, but the reason why I'm doing that is to get them to critically think about what they're proposing, what they're researching, what they're reading, what they're presenting, because it's very easy now to generate a result from an AI tool and never fact check it,
Right.
never check that that's not a hallucination or anything. And so much research has come out recently that around about 80 to 90% of marketing output is never checked. That
Wow.
includes marketing content,
Yeah.
slogans, ads, images, that could be endless amounts of things. So that's quite a scary place. And this is where we start to see a lot more what's known as like AI work slop, where it's just very
Yeah.
generic. You can tell it's been written by an AI tool and it's not been put into the brand voice or anything. And we see
Yeah.
so much of that now, we just switch off immediately.
Yeah.
So the critical thinking is really important. I've seen such a huge decline on that. It's actually quite concerning for the marketing industry because we really need to have that critical thinking to engage with our audience, and that's really important. The other thing is leadership. Leadership skills are also increasingly important. As actually we were talking about this right at the start of before we joined this, and leadership skills are also incredibly important to be able to develop as a marketeer, both for being able to have leadership in the room, for example, if you're presenting to clients or if you need to present to the rest of the business, having that level of confidence, being able to manage people, and that could be fully remotely, it could be face to face, it could be hybrids. That's also a very important skill to have in marketing.
Mm. And actually, that leads to a question I was going to ask, perhaps a final question for me from before we go to the people listening and their questions. How do you use a good marketing strategy and a sound approach to measurement to get cut through at a board level? So that's always one of the challenges for senior marketing leaders, right? In terms of getting that sort of buy-in and commitment from those senior people. Is there a particular tip or approach you would take? So I've got the strategy, got the measurement. This is how you can use it to get that buy-in at board level.
Yeah, so the most the most effective way is to have a level of story with it. So I
Right.
think either putting it through the lens of the most effective ones I've seen and the ones that we've also done ourselves when we're engaging with clients and maybe we're presenting a strategy back to our clients, is to do it through the eyes of the consumer or the end user and talk about the value that it's going to give them rather than having all of the positioning on the business. And yes, of course, it's important to talk about the value that it's going to demonstrate to the business and the output and to bring that at the end. Because ultimately, marketing is all about engaging the customer. And we should be talking a lot about the customer. That should be the center of our strategy. The whole board and the rest of the business are all aligned to engaging with that same customer. So if we can elevate that customer, we can really talk about what their journey is, what their experience maybe currently is. This is how it's going to change. This is what we're going to do. This is how we're going to engage them. Then immediately it becomes less about what money are you spending and more about, okay, and the value that this is going to give to the customer. I can see that now. And actually, maybe we could do this and this. And then you start to get more of a buy-in because it's less about, well, maybe we shouldn't be doing this tactical campaign, or maybe we shouldn't be doing that banner ad. Maybe we should be doing something else. And it's more about where does this fit within the customer's expectations of us as a brand, as a product, or as a service.
Yeah. Brilliant. So we've covered a lot of ground today, and you've done a great job in fielding all of my questions. And I definitely think there's lots of things there for people to take away and think about. And I think we've got people listening in actually today who are perhaps in lots of people in lots of different places in terms of where they are in their career and what they're doing. But we have got some questions that have come through. One of them actually just comes back to AI, and actually the idea that some people are not using it strategically. Can you just build on that a little bit in terms of where you think people aren't using it strategically, perhaps why? We've got some people that think it is, some people that perhaps would agree with you. Just build on your point as to why you don't think it's being used strategically at this moment in time.
Yeah, so Claire, great to hear that you're using it strategically. So please don't feel
Yeah.
like, well, maybe I'm looking in and you're not, because that's not the case at all. Um, on the whole, I don't see many marketers using it strategically. And what I mean by that is that we tend to be going into, and you might not be doing this, which is great to hear, but what I've witnessed and what I've seen is a lot of marketers going into the AI tools and asking it, generate me this copy, or I'm trying, or generate a subject line for me, or create this image. And it's very tactical level rather than, okay, using it as the assistant, like I mentioned at the very beginning, and giving it that context and having that full conversation like you would with an assistant of, okay, it can generate that image, but this is what it's for. This is how it fits into the wider strategy. This is where it's going to be in the customer journey. This is the persona. This is who we're trying to engage. These are my metrics. This is what I'm hoping to achieve in terms of objectives. That would be using it strategically rather than create me this piece of content. Boom, it does it. Okay, great. Straight onto the website.
The other thing I would add there, actually, I would agree with you, Jenna, in terms of what I see. So let's say I meet 100 heads of marketing, for example. Are they all using it strategically? Definitely not. Are some? Yes, definitely. Let's say it's 50-50. And what's the difference also between those people? It is that enthusiasm, that curiosity, that, people say to me, how quickly do you think AI will be implemented within marketing or whatever, or within our organization? And I say, well, it really depends on the individual. Because if the particular marketing director in an organization is really curious and they've set up a task force in their team to understand it, to implement it, they've set key targets, they're reading every possible book that's out there on AI and all of this sort of stuff, then it's going to be implemented at pace. But if there are some, and there will be some marketing directors who, have got other priorities, other things they're juggling, maybe personally, whatever it may be, less curious. Some people say, "Oh, that's not for me. I'm a bit of a laggard. I'll wait until I get dragged into the future." Then it's going to take a lot longer for those organisations, and I think that's human behaviour. But therefore, that's human behaviour that we do see taking place. Some people are really pushing it and using it strategically, and some people aren't. So I think it's a real mix. But we have another question from Claire who's saying, "What's the best AI tool for measurement tracking?" So there's a particular direct question where there's anything you can share there, Jenna.
Not in terms of specific tool for measurement tracking because actually you can use Copilot, Claude, ChatGPT can all analyze your data very effectively, especially if you have that contextual prompt. You could actually build, and we have clients, and we've also done this ourselves, where you're building your own. Um, it's not quite to the scale of an AI agent, but let's say it's like a GPT. It's similar to that. And you're building that customization. You've put in that wider context. You've given it the background, the details of your strategy, and then you're asking it to analyze that becomes very, very useful. So that's the same as if you could create your own bespoke AI assistant, for example, and a number of brands do that. We also have some of those ourselves. We've been testing those out. And then it's more specific to your brand or to the client that you might be working with. So it's not, this is where it goes back to that tool agnostic piece, because if we think about the critical thinking and the strategic way of using it, we can use any tool and it will give us a really good result. And the mainstream AI tools are all very good at analyzing the data and bringing back those results. If you're looking at measuring a specific platform or any of those elements, the majority of tools now already have AI built into them. So like GA4, for example, is one of the most robust tracking tools. But if it's for like email marketing or for Meta, any of those platforms, then they also have their own built-in tracking systems in there. Um, if you're using a wider ecosystem like Salesforce Marketing Cloud, for example, then that would also have all of your platforms and campaigns together. Digital is also a very, very good platform for bringing all of the ecosystem together and all of your digital marketing channels together as well.
Brilliant. And another quick question. We have obviously people listening in with all sorts of different experiences, but we've got Bethany here, essentially a small business owner, so perhaps not an experienced marketer herself. Any particular advice there? Is it to look at a particular model, a framework, start there, I can imagine, or what advice would you give someone who's not a marketer but running their own business? They need to start somewhere with a marketing strategy.
Yeah, so I actually wrote my book for business owners, marketers, students, so people coming in, people that haven't used it before. I actually had a really great review from a library that had used my book to develop their own strategy, and they were not marketers. So I would heavily recommend, obviously, my book, but to look at the strategy framework. I also have a number of blogs available on my website where it outlines the framework. And that's a really good place to start. So you can see what the key areas that you need to be focusing on, like your audience, like what we've been talking about in terms of the metrics you're going to be measuring, your objectives, and the marketing environment.
Brilliant. And one quick final question from Melina here. Any thoughts, particularly on partner marketing and what that should look like these days?
Yeah, partner marketing it really depends on what industry you're in terms of what that should look like. It's still very important. Actually, we've seen quite a big movement towards having much more deeper, trusting relationships rather than we just need loads of partners and let's just bring them all on board. Um, and for them to be very closely aligned to the values of your organization and your products and services, but also the most important part is that they're aligned to your customer. So who's most aligned and most engaged with your audience base? Now, that's not to say that it's a partner, and you could look at influencers as partners as well. It's not to say that someone with the most amount of following or the biggest organization is going to be the best one. This is where we see the growth of the micro influencers and the smaller partners actually delivering more value because they have more of those trusted longevity relationships than someone who might have hundreds of millions of customers, but actually they don't really know the individuals. So it really depends on your industry, the product and service, but that's a big change that we've seen in marketing.
Brilliant. Thank you. Great answer. One final question from Simon here. Considering today's complex customer journeys and tracking challenges, how do you approach attribution from a strategic perspective?
Yeah,
Any
great
thoughts on that?
question, Simon. Yeah, this is quite a challenging area, especially as we start to get more gaps in our tracking and we don't necessarily see all the elements of the customer journey. Whilst we map out the customer journey and it's not as linear as that, if we can align that as closely as possible to our target customer, that gives us a really good starting point for looking at attribution. And that allows us to see, are we really capturing all of the key touch points that we need to be measuring to achieve our goals and objectives? Now, that's not to say we're going to necessarily capture all of it, because that can be quite tricky to do. And we might find that we've got some data spots that we can't see, but that allows us to have that initial starting point. And then once you've got to that place, you can then obviously add more and more as you start to further develop that tracking approach that you have. But I would always suggest you start simpler first and then build upon that, rather than trying to do all of it all at once. Start simple and then add more and more as you get more and more tracking coming in, you get more and more data, and you can test it as well that way.
Brilliant. Thank you for that. Good question, Simon. And I think we are at the point where I think we've covered off the questions, and I might start drawing things to a close, Jenna, because we've covered a lot of ground, and I'm mindful of time. Is there just final quick point? Is there, for those people that are listening in, I talked actually at the top of the conversation about these Meet the Author conversations are there to support learning and development. Actually, I think about the questions that have been asked today and the people that are listening in and what you've talked about. A big part of what we've been doing today is learning together and learning from you as you talk through your experience. Is there one final tip that you might give as a next step for people to go away and think about in terms of marketing strategy and measurement? One final tip that you might give?
Yeah, so my final tip would be to stay curious, question your strategy if you have one. If you don't already have one, there's a starting point for you to dive into that. But to be curious about your customer, what's really impacting them right now. It might not be something that your business can solve, but that starts to tell you a lot about, what they're facing, their wider context, what they value, what might be challenging, and their pain points right now. And the same for your industry, the marketplace. Be curious about that. I'm researching all the time. I'm always asking questions. Well, why is that the case? What's happening here? And wanting to uncover that. And having that level of curiosity really not only keeps your brain fresh, it keeps you asking those strategic questions, and it helps you to be curious about your own strategy, because at the end of the day, we want it to be fun. And if we're asking questions of it, we'll start to unpack other areas. And then it doesn't become stale. It becomes fresh, and we can keep, reinvigorating it.
You know what? I totally agree with that. I think about that phrase, be curious. If I interviewed 100 marketing directors, successful marketing directors, they'd all be different personality traits, different approaches to life, different backgrounds. But I think there'd be some commonality. And I think one of those things of a successful marketing director is that they would be curious wherever they're at in their career journey, even if they've been in the game for 10, 15, 20, 30 years. I think the most successful people still maintain that level of curiosity about the things they're doing, the business they work for, the way that they learn, all of those sorts of things. So I would echo that as a great tip. Whatever you're doing, stay curious, because that will drive innovation and thinking and all of those sorts of things. So perhaps a good final point to finish on there, Jenna. Thank you so much for your time this afternoon. Thanks for sharing so much of your thoughts and experience with us. Thank you to everyone that has joined in and listened this afternoon as well. As I mentioned at the start, never enough time to go through all of this stuff, and I'm sure we could have talked for hours. So if you want to learn more, I would recommend picking up a copy of Jenna's book, and do use the discount code that we've shared in the chat as well. For all of those people listening today, we'll send out an email as well just to reconfirm where you can listen to the video again, and that discount code as well to have a look at that. And please do connect with Jenna on LinkedIn. You've got a great LinkedIn profile which shouts loudly about all of the experience you've got. It's amazing to see everything that you've done during your career. So I know you'll be very happy to connect with people that would be interested in connecting with you, particularly if there's a conversation they want to take further. So thank you for that. And to Jenna and everyone that's listening, we will be running other Meet the Author events and conversations in the future. So please do look out for those. Please do come and join us again. Other brilliant people out there like Jenna who have written some brilliant books that I'm sure you'll also find interesting to hear about. So thanks to you all. Thanks for listening. Have a great rest of the day. And one way or another, we'll see you all soon. Thanks very much.
Thanks so much, everyone.
Bye-bye.